A couple years back, I was in Rome, Georgia for a leadership conference with some guys, and it was a beautiful afternoon in Rome, Georgia, and some of us got on mountain bikes. There were just a few of us, and we decided to take this ride up into the mountains, and it was just a gorgeous day. The sun was shining, there was a little bit of a breeze, and we went about an 8 or 9 mile mountain bike ride up through the woods, and we had a pretty long climb, and I was with a couple other guys. We got to the top of the climb, and I was really breathing hard. It was a fairly steep and fairly long, and we were all kind of sitting there panting, and I said to the group, I said, I guess 45 minutes a day on the elliptical trainer isn't enough to keep me in shape to do this. And one of the guys that was there, I'd only known him for a couple of days, and I didn't know him well, said to me, kind of looked at me, and he said, well, the truth teller in me wants to say that it's probably not the 45 minutes on the elliptical trainer that's the problem. It's probably the 45 extra pounds that you're carrying that's really causing the problem. Now, I don't know what it was about me that made him think I was looking for a truth teller, but the grave is shallow, but I did mark it. And honestly, the 45 extra pounds helped a little bit in the tussle. I'm just kidding, but the reality is sometimes we need a truth teller. This guy was a great guy who I'd had gotten the privilege to know, and his words were true. The fact of the matter was I was carrying extra weight, and I think he was a truth teller by nature. He didn't mean to be hurtful. I think his words came from an honest heart, and while I may not have wanted to hear the words, they weren't meant in a harmful way. And there are times in our lives, lots of times, when we need truth tellers. Speaking the truth in love is really the challenge that John's going to make to us as we wrap up these 2 short letters today, 2 John and 3 John. Eugene Peterson, in his introduction to the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd books of John, says this: the 2 most difficult things to get straight in life are love and God. More often than not, the mess people make of their lives can be traced to a failure or stupidity or meanness in one or both of these areas. And we know that can be true. I want to start this message by reading 2 John and 3 John rather. They're both short, and so I want to invite you to follow along in your Bible if you have them with you. This is what John says in 2 John. The elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, in truth and love. I rejoiced greatly to find some of your children walking in truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. And now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but the one we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you should walk in it. For many deceivers have gone out from the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus in the flesh. Such a one is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch yourselves, so that you may not lose what we have worked for, but may win a full reward. Everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting. For whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works. Though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face, so that our joy may be complete. The children of your elect sister greet you. Now let me move on to 3 John. The elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. Beloved, I pray that all will go well with you and that you may be in good health, as it goes well with your soul. For I rejoiced greatly when the brothers came and testified to your truth, as indeed you are walking in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in truth. So, beloved, it is a faithful thing you do in all of your efforts for these brothers, strangers as they are, who testified to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God, for they have gone out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore, we ought to support people like these, that we may be fellow workers in truth. I've written something to the church, but Diotrephes, who likes to put himself first, does not acknowledge our authority. So if I come, I will bring up what he is doing, talking wicked nonsense about us. And not content with that, he refuses to welcome the brothers, and also stops those who want to and puts them out of the church. Beloved, do not imitate evil, but imitate good. Whoever does good is from God. Whoever does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself. We also add our testimony, and you know that our testimony is true. I had much to write to you, but I would rather not write with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon, and we will talk face to face. Peace be to you. The friends greet you. Greet one another, and the friends each by name. Now, John really sums up all of his writing, it seems to me like, and gets these three things to us in this text. The first thing is this: stay clear of toxic people. The second thing is, be truth seekers and truth tellers. And the last thing is, love well. You know, in the midst of a culture that kept hospitality at its center, there are some people to whom John exhorts us not to offer hospitality. He says, stay clear of toxic people. We are living in a violent, toxic culture in America right now. I was watching a bit on Sky News this week, which is an Australian news agency, because I use my time wisely. And one of the commentators said, America's in a real mess. It's really difficult to watch this go on in America. I really feel sorry for the Americans. And you know, whatever your view of how things are going and how things are being worked out and how our country is being led at this time, you have to probably admit, I think we can all agree, that we're living in a really toxic environment. And the early church was also facing challenging times and toxic people. Particularly, John is addressing those false teachers who were moving around the church and causing a lot of division. Eugene Peterson paraphrases 2 John verse 7 this way: there are a lot of smooth-talking charlatans loose in the world who refuse to believe that Jesus Christ was truly human, a flesh and blood human being. Give them their true title: deceiver, antichrist. So we can see a little bit of what's going on. Again, this is a consistent theme throughout John's writing. There were those who were teaching false doctrines, specifically as it related to Jesus being fully God and fully man. Remember the Gnostics, who said that Jesus didn't really come in the flesh. In 3 John, a name of one of the toxic people is actually called out. Diotrephes, John says, who likes to put himself first, does not acknowledge our authority. So if I come, I'm going to bring up what he's doing. And what does John describe as toxic? What's going on in both of these letters? There are different things, but he's really addressing a few things here. And the first thing that we can say that John is addressing, and what does it look like to be toxic, is that he's putting himself first. This is Diotrephes specifically. He wants to put himself first. You know, toxic people put themselves first. There are people who like power. They like to get power and they like to keep power. Eugene Peterson paraphrases it: they love being in charge. There are certain people who love being in charge, and they'll do whatever it takes to stay in charge. Some people just need to be in charge. They just can't stand it when they're not. Do you wonder if John's thinking here goes back to the moment that he and James approached Jesus and said, we would like to ask you to do for us whatever we ask? It's in Mark chapter 10. It begins in verse 35. Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. Grant us to sit one on your right and one on your left, one on your right hand and one on your left, when you come into glory. You know, Jesus and his disciples are on the way to Jerusalem, and Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink from? Are you able to be baptized with the baptism that I will be baptized with? What they don't understand is that Jesus, and Jesus does understand, is that the cup he's going to drink and the baptism that he's going to go through will be a withering beating and a crucifixion. And it turns out that the persons on Jesus' right and on his left are two thieves who are also being crucified with him. Jesus goes on to say, guys, the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over their people, but in the kingdom of God, it's the servant who's the greatest. And I wonder if John's not thinking back to those days when he was maybe a little bit power hungry and realizes the importance of now serving and being the least instead of the first. Beyond that, what else do we know about these kind of toxic leaders? The second thing is that they don't acknowledge the authority of John and the other church leaders. They're not acknowledging the authorities of the church that they're supposed to be under. We understand that toxic people can be slanderous, right? They're talking wicked nonsense, John says, about us and about the church leaders. We know that toxic people aren't truth tellers. He refuses to welcome those believers who are coming into town who are teaching the truth. Diotrephes says, don't welcome those brothers who are teaching the truth. And so we understand that toxic people don't welcome truth tellers because that challenges their power. John says that Diotrephes even wants to put those people out of the church. And so when you have someone in power, you have a toxic person there, they don't want to lose power. And they'll fight against the truth tellers. You know, he contrasts Diotrephes with Demetrius, about whom everyone is speaking highly. Here's what John has to say about what he does with toxic people. He says, here's how you need to treat toxic people. He says, don't receive them into your house. Don't give them any greeting. And don't give them any platform from which to speak. He said, whoever takes part with them, whoever is seen with them, is seen to be taking part in their wicked works. And so John says, you just need to stay clear of toxic people. You need to stay completely clear of them. They want everything their own way. They want to be first. They don't acknowledge the authority of other leaders. They are slanderous and talk wickedly. And they don't welcome other truth tellers. And so he says, just don't have any part of them. Now, it's kind of fascinating, given the culture of the time, that John exhorts the church to not extend hospitality to false teachers and troublemakers. Diotrephes, of course, appears to be a part of the church, and John says, I'll deal with him when I come to see you. But hospitality is a core value of the church going all the way back into Judaism. And John says, don't open your home to them. Don't open your home to those people who are speaking lies. Don't befriend them. Don't give them a platform. You need to remove their influence. You know, the best thing that you and I can do sometimes with the toxic people in our life is not to give them a platform or any foothold in our lives. We don't participate with them. To be honest, one of the most difficult things for me personally during this season of the pandemic and now rioting and unrest in our country and during this election season is the tone all around us. I found myself, frankly, this week just really discouraged because it's everywhere. It almost seems that there's nowhere to go from it. And it's on social media, it's on the news. It sometimes feels like it's a part of every conversation that we have. In some ways, it's been my own fault because I keep listening, in part because I have a desire to hear and to know and to understand. And in some ways, I want to be a voice of light and truth and peace. And I want to seek to bring grace and peace into the world around me. And so I stay engaged in those ways. But in some ways, I'm having to simply turn off the noise and the voices and the toxicity around me. As a friend of mine told me once, talking about Facebook, he said, I have successfully unfollowed my way to a positive Facebook experience. And I'm following suit. Sometimes that's important. But some of you have opted out of social media altogether, and I applaud you for that. I've stayed in with some hope of spreading a little humor and goodwill and words of life and light. But it's really a toxic environment that we live in right now. And sometimes we just have to separate ourselves from it. We live in a toxic world. And sometimes in order to be light and life, we have to close the doors and not give the toxic any foothold or any platform in our lives. What we need to give our attention to, and John tells us this, is truth-telling and truth-seeking, because he says we are called to be truth seekers and truth tellers. Notice how many times John uses the word truth in both of these short letters. In 2 John, here's some examples. The elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth. And not just I, but also all who know the truth, because the truth abides forever and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God and Jesus in truth and love. I rejoice to find some of your children walking in truth. When John talks about abiding in the teaching of Christ, he's talking about abiding in truth. When you move on to 3 John, I rejoice greatly when the brothers came and testified to your truth, as indeed you are walking in truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in truth. We ought to support people like these, the traveling Christians who are going back and forth and we're coming into the villages, that we may be fellow workers in the truth. Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself. We also add our testimony, and you know that our testimony is true. There were those in the church who were working diligently to teach the truth and those who were distorting it. And John comes down firmly on those who are holding on to the truth. He's on their side. He says, we should stand with the people who hold with the truth. And that's our call as well. This isn't all we've heard from John on the topic of truth. If we look at the Gospel of John, he says, Jesus came full of grace and truth. He says, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. True worshipers worship the Father in spirit and truth. John bore witness to the truth. Jesus himself speaks about the truth. He says, I am the way and the truth and the life. You will know the truth and the truth will set you free. When the Spirit of truth comes, talking about the Holy Spirit, when the Helper comes, he is the Spirit of truth. Jesus prays for his disciples and all of us who would come after, sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. Jesus said, I consecrate myself for their sake, that they also may be sanctified in the truth. Jesus says to Pilate, I have come into the world to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. You know, in a world of sound bites and memes, it's difficult at times to get to the truth. It takes work. But we're called to be a people of truth. Remember what John says, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in truth. The truth in the heart of Christ and in the teaching and heart of John needs to be at the heart of the church and every Christian, because it's what Jesus says. When you know the truth will set you free. And it's true that when you know the truth about anything, the truth will set you free. We need to be truth seekers and truth tellers. The truth is what's needed in our culture. Let me challenge you first to be a seeker of truth in every area of your thinking. And then remember, I gave you a definition a few weeks ago of what truth is. And here's what truth is. Truth has to do with whatever in fact is real. It is a statement idea, or belief is true when it corresponds to spiritual or material reality. And so we need to be truth tellers. We need to seek the truth. We need to tell the truth. And being a truth teller takes a little bit of courage at times. John tells us the truth about Jesus. And one of the reasons that he's so adamant about Jesus coming in the flesh is because it was truly who Jesus was. Remember, he said, we saw him with our eyes, we heard him with our ears, we touched him with our hands. He was real. And the most important truth that we can tell the world is the truth that John's been telling us, is that the life is in this person, Jesus Christ. He who has the Son has life, and he who does not have the Son of God does not have life. And we are the church, and it's our call, it is our mission to tell the world about Jesus. Jesus is the hope of the nations. And if we're living hoping that we get the right government in place so we can change the world, then we're putting our hope in the wrong thing. John says our hope needs to be in Christ, and that's the message we have to give to the world. And remember, it's not awful to season it with a little grace. I wonder if part of what John is talking about in the first chapter of the Gospel of John, when he says, and we beheld his glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. I wonder if what he's talking about when he says we beheld his glory is that he was full both of grace and truth, at the same time. That's an amazing thing. Some of us are so full of grace, we just can't tell the truth. And some of us are so full of truth, we never get any grace to come along with it. John may have been saying that part of the glory of Christ is that he held grace and truth in equal measure. It's something that we should aim at, and that brings us to the final thing that John really wants to say to us in these letters. He says, don't forget to love well. Notice in 2nd and 3rd John, there's a focus on love. He says, let grace, mercy, and peace be with us in truth and love. Now I ask you to do the thing we've asked from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, walking in his commandments. In 3rd John, he says, the elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. The brothers and strangers to the church testified of the love before the church. Notice how often John speaks the language of the beloved. Truth is the most important thing that we can say right up until it isn't. And it isn't when we've forgotten to tell the truth in love. You remember the words of Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. He says this, if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, but I have not love, then I don't have anything. And then Paul goes on to remind us what love really is. He gives us this picture of love. You remember in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, he says multiple things to us about love. He says love is patient and it's kind and it doesn't envy and it doesn't boast. It isn't arrogant or rude. It doesn't insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It doesn't rejoice in wrongdoing. It rejoices in truth. Love bears all things. Love believes all things. Love hopes all things. Love endures all things. Paul says love never fails. He says, so now faith, hope, and love remain, but the greatest of these is love. The laundry list of what love looks like should be present in every one of our human interactions, or at least growing in us. We're never going to completely and perfectly hit the mark in this life, but that's what it looks like. He's just given us a picture in 1 Corinthians 13 what love looks like. And that's what ought to be reflected in people who are being molded and shaped into the image of Christ. I don't have to remind us what Jesus said was the greatest commandment, but I will. You remember Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment in the law? And Jesus says, here's what it is. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength, and then love your neighbor as yourself. It really is about love. And why is love so important? Well, first of all, love is God's essential character and it is his central project. Love is what God is about. Love is God's essential nature. You remember that in 1 John chapter 4, verse 7 and 8, John writes, beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. And so we understand that God is love. It's his essential nature. And so we need to pay attention to that reality. And then Christ showed us how to love. Christ showed us how to love. He said, love your enemies. He loved the marginalized. He loved the sinners and the prostitutes. He loved the foreigners. He loved those who crucified him. And we see it in his words, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Christ charged us to go into the world and to love. It's John who wrote, for God so loved the world that he sent his Son. Our job is not to love the world in the sense that we become like it and it shapes us. Not in the way that we hold on to the world at all costs, but our call is to love the world and to wish for its good and to bring the kingdom for its good and the good of all the people in it. You know how you're going to know if you love the world in that way? When you're grieved by its brokenness, when you're grieved by the loss and the destruction that's going on in it. Grief is the price that we pay for love. And when we see the world falling apart and it grieves us, we understand that's the love of God in us for goodness for the world. What's breaking your heart in the world today? There's a lot. I find myself weighed down with it. And where are you called to step to step into with the love of God. That's our call as the church. One could get the impression from John's teaching that while truth is certainly important, being right isn't the highest value in God's economy. Loving is the highest value in God's economy. And so, as we wrap this up, we're living in a toxic world, and we're surrounded by toxic people and toxic messages. And how are we going to step away from that so that we can be light and life and peace and hope in the world around us? If we spend lots of time around toxic people and we spend all our time with toxic messages, that's going to flow into us, and it's going to shape us, and it's going to form us, and we're going to become toxic. So we need to be truth tellers and truth seekers, and we need to love well. We need to love more than we need to be right. If you have to make a choice about being right or loving well, it seems like the right choice is to love well. And so here's some questions to think about as we just wrap this up. The first one is, are you habitually allowing toxic information and relationships to distort your life? If you are, you need to step out of that. It's not healthy. Find ways to get away from it. Are there some habits or relationships that you need to cut out in order for your life to be restored to joy? Are you a truth teller? Are you a truth seeker, and have you just been lazy in passing on information that somebody passes to you? Maybe it's just because it fits your narrative. Are you telling the truth about Jesus and the life that's in him? And then, who's one person this week to whom you could witness the truth about Jesus? Not necessarily someone outside the faith, though that's good. That's certainly important. But maybe there's someone within the faith who just needs to be encouraged, who just needs to hear the good news. And are you loving the world? Where is the world breaking your heart? What's the place for you to step in? And are you loving others? Who is one person who right now you are not loving well? And then finally, what is one thing that you could do in this next week to love that person well? Sometimes we need to put feet to this. We always need to put feet to this. We're called to stay clear of toxic people. We're called to be truth seekers and truth tellers. And we're called to love well. That's John's word to us. And there's never been a better time to live that out. God bless.